George Cooper died on a Tuesday. His heart stopped at work. He was in his early 40s. He had just received the best news of his professional life. Rice University wanted him. A real coaching job at a real university. For the first time in 20 years, someone had looked at George Cooper and said, "You are worth more than what you are getting." And before he could drive home to tell his family, his heart stopped. No warning, no goodbye, just a man in a room who was alive at lunch and dead before dinner. That evening, the Cooper house collapsed. Mary was sedated. Missy asked 4 words at the front door that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "He is okay, right?" Georgie started making phone calls no 17-year-old should have to make. The neighbors came, the pastor came. The whole town felt the weight of a good man dying too young. And Sheldon Cooper, the 9-year-old genius who would one day win the Nobel Prize in Physics, the boy whose entire family had reorganized their lives around his brain, the child who George had driven to NASA and coached through panic attacks and protected from a world that could not understand him, that Sheldon Cooper showed zero visible emotion. Zero. Not one tear at the door, not one breakdown in his room, not one moment where his body registered the loss the way every other body in that house did. His father died and Sheldon's face did not change. His routine did not change. His priorities did not change. The most emotionally devastating event in the history of the Cooper family hit Sheldon Cooper like a math problem he had already solved. And 20 years later, when Sheldon talked about his father to his friends in California, he called him a beer-drinking, not that bright, crude Texas football coach. He reduced the man who sacrificed everything for his family to 3 adjectives and a job title. The man who died on the best day of his career was remembered by his own son as a drunk. That is the story of Sheldon Cooper that nobody wants to tell. Not the genius, not the Nobel Prize, not the eidetic memory and the equations and the breakthroughs that changed physics. The story of a boy who watched his father die and felt nothing, and then spent 2 decades punishing the dead man for it. I did not want to make this video, and I need to be honest about why. Every character I have covered on this channel, I have defended. I have found the humanity in flawed people. I have looked for the pain underneath the behavior. I have tried to understand before I judged. I cannot do that with Sheldon. Not completely. Not honestly. Because the more I studied his behavior across both shows, the more I realized something that genuinely unsettled me. Sheldon Cooper may be the most destructive character in the entire franchise. Not because he is evil, but because he consumes everything around him without registering the cost. He absorbs the oxygen in every room, the money in every bank account, the attention of every parent, the energy of every sibling. And he does it with a clear conscience because his brain has convinced him that his needs are objectively more important than anyone else's. And the worst part is, the show agrees with him. The show rewards him. The show ends with Sheldon winning the Nobel Prize and thanking his friends and crying on stage, and the audience cheers. Nobody in that audience is doing the math. Nobody is calculating what that Nobel Prize cost the people who made it possible. So let me do the math. There is a clinical term for what Sheldon displays at his father's death. It is called alexithymia. It comes from the Greek, a meaning without, lexis meaning words, thymos meaning emotions, without words for emotions. It describes a neurological condition where a person has difficulty identifying, processing, and expressing emotions, not because they choose not to feel, because their brain is structurally wired differently. People with alexithymia can experience physiological stress responses. Their heart rate increases, their palms sweat. Their body reacts to loss and grief the same way any body does. But the bridge between the physical sensation and the conscious identification of that sensation is broken. They feel something in their chest. They do not know it is grief. They feel tension in their body. They do not know it is fear. The data arrives, the label does not. And this is where I need to be careful, because understanding that Sheldon may have alexithymia does not excuse what he did with his father's memory. Alexithymia explains why Sheldon did not cry at the door. It does not explain why Sheldon spent 20 years calling his dead father a drunk. The inability to feel grief is a condition. The decision to rewrite a dead man's legacy is a choice. And that choice is where Sheldon Cooper crosses the line, from misunderstood genius to something much harder to forgive. Let me take you back to a scene that most people watch as comedy and I watch as a diagnosis. The Cooper family is facing a potential move to a new state. George has been offered a job, a better job, more money, a real opportunity. But it means uprooting the entire family, leaving Medford, leaving the school, leaving the church, leaving the only community the children have ever known. Mary and George are agonizing over this decision. They are lying in bed at night talking about it. They are weighing the children's stability against George's career. They are doing what parents do when a decision affects everyone in the house. They are worried. They are stressed. They are terrified of making the wrong choice. And Sheldon walks in and asks one question. He asks if they will have a dog. Not will my friends be okay. Not will Missy be scared. Not how will Georgie feel about changing schools. Not are you and Mum going to be all right. Will they have a dog? The show plays this as adorable. Classic Sheldon. Missing the emotional context. Focused on the literal detail. The audience laughs. But rewatch that scene knowing what happens to this family. Rewatch it knowing George will die young. Rewatch it knowing Missy will spend her childhood invisible. Rewatch it knowing Georgie will drop out of school to support the family. Rewatch it knowing that Mary will spend 20 years burying her guilt under religion. And then ask yourself, is a child who cannot register his parents' distress during a major family crisis just quirky? Or is something fundamentally missing? Here is the thing about Sheldon Cooper that nobody says out loud. The entire Cooper family restructured their lives around one child's brain. And every restructuring came at someone else's expense. When Sheldon needed to attend high school at 9, the family adjusted. George drove him. Mary managed the social complications. The school accommodated. But Georgie, who was already in that high school, suddenly had his 9-year-old brother in his classes. Imagine being 14, and your kid brother is sitting next to you in science class, answering every question before you can raise your hand. Nobody asked Georgie if he was okay with that. When Sheldon needed to attend college at 11, the family adjusted again. George rearranged his coaching schedule. Mary reorganized the household calendar. Meemaw drove Sheldon to campus. But Missy, who was the same age, got nothing. No special program. No additional resources. No conversation about what she wanted to be. The twin study proved Missy had exceptional emotional intelligence. Nobody invested in it. All the investment went to equations. When Sheldon needed to go to Germany for a summer program, the family scraped together the money. Mary went with him. George stayed behind with Missy and Georgie. A tornado hit Medford while they were gone. George covered Missy with his body in a ditch, and Sheldon was in Germany, learning physics, while his father was shielding his sister from debris with his own body. Every time Sheldon's brain needed something, the family paid, and the currency was always the same. Attention, money, time, and energy taken from Georgie and Missy and given to Sheldon. Not because the parents were cruel, because Sheldon's needs screamed louder than anyone else's. And screaming gets resources. Silence gets nothing. And here is what makes this worse. Sheldon lived in the same house as George for 14 years. The same corridors, the same dinner table, the same kitchen, the same patio, where George sat alone with a beer every evening because it was the only place on earth where nobody needed anything from him. Sheldon walked past that patio hundreds of times. He saw his father sitting there, and he registered nothing. Not the beer as a coping mechanism, not the silence as a symptom, not the solitude as a cry for help. He saw a man sitting outside with a drink, and he filed it as data. Dad, patio, beer, status, normal. 20 years later, that data point became a character description. Beer drinking, not that bright, crude. The patio was not a cry for help in Sheldon's memory. It was evidence of mediocrity. George sitting alone drinking beer proved to Sheldon that his father was simple. It never occurred to him that a man might drink alone because the people inside the house had taken everything he had and left nothing for him to feel. A genius who can decode the universe at the subatomic level watched his father drown for 14 years and described it as floating. Sheldon cannot solve people. He has never been able to solve people. And the person who paid the highest price for that limitation was the man who loved him most. George's funeral is one of the most devastating sequences in young Sheldon. The whole family is shattered. Mary is barely functional. Georgie is holding everything together while falling apart inside. Missy says goodbye at the casket by talking about Red Lobster because her best memory of her father is just dinner. And Sheldon is present but not there. His body occupies space in the room. His face is composed. His routine adjusts minimally. He does not collapse. He does not scream. He does not lock himself in his room and refuse to come out. He processes his father's death the way he processes a canceled lecture, with mild inconvenience. Now here is where I need to be fair. Alexithymia means Sheldon may be feeling grief physically without being able to name it. His chest may be tight, his stomach may hurt, his sleep may be disrupted. But the bridge between sensation and identification is broken. He cannot look at the pain in his body and say, "This is because my father is dead." The data arrives without a label, but here is where fairness ends and accountability begins. Because Sheldon does not just fail to grieve. He fails to notice that everyone around him is grieving. Mary is on the sofa sedated, and Sheldon does not ask if she is okay. Missy is at the casket crying, and Sheldon does not hold her hand. Georgie is making phone calls with tears running down his face, and Sheldon does not say, "Brother, what do you need?" The inability to feel your own grief is a condition. The inability to see someone else's grief when they are crying 3 feet away from you is something else entirely. It is not alexithymia. It is a blind spot so large that an entire family can disappear inside it. And then Sheldon leaves. For Caltech, for California, for the beginning of the trajectory that leads to the Nobel Prize. The timing of this departure is the cruelest detail in the franchise. George has just died. The house is in crisis. Mary cannot function. Missy is spiraling. Georgie has no diploma and no plan, and is suddenly the man of the house at 17. And the family decides that the best use of their rapidly diminishing resources is to send Sheldon to California. Think about that decision from Georgie's perspective. His father just died, his mother is broken, his twin sister is rebelling, and the family is spending money they do not have to send the genius to a university 3,000 miles away, while Georgie stays behind and works. The dropout funds the degree, the forgotten son finances the favorite son, and the favorite son gets on a plane and never looks back. Sheldon does not call home regularly, he does not send money, he does not fly back to help Georgie manage the household, he does not check on Missy. He enters the world of theoretical physics, and the family he left behind becomes a footnote. Not because he is malicious, because in Sheldon's hierarchy of importance, the universe and its equations rank above the people who sacrificed everything so he could study them. In The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon builds a life in Pasadena. Friends, colleagues, a girlfriend who becomes a wife, a Nobel Prize, an apartment with a spot on the couch that nobody else is allowed to sit in. He builds all of this on a foundation poured by people he rarely mentions. And when he does mention them, he describes his father as a drunk, his brother as uneducated, and his mother's other children as dumb as soup. And this is the part that makes me genuinely angry. Because forgetting to grieve is one thing. Actively rewriting a dead man's legacy is another. Sheldon tells his friends in California that his father was a beer-drinking, not-that-bright football coach who cheated on his mother. He says this casually, repeatedly, across 12 seasons, as if these are simple facts about a simple man. But we watched young Sheldon. We saw George turn down the Tulsa job because Mary did not want to move. We saw George drive Sheldon to NASA so an engineer could look at a 9-year-old's calculations. We saw George coach football with genuine passion and mentor teenagers who had nobody else. We saw George cover Missy with his body during a tornado. We saw George try to surprise Mary at the church because he felt guilty about his own behavior and wanted to be better. We saw George almost cross a line with Brenda Sparks and stop himself because his marriage still mattered to him. And the cheating. The famous moment that traumatized Sheldon so deeply it created his triple knock habit. The moment he walked in on his father with another woman. Young Sheldon reveals it was Mary, in a blonde wig, in a costume, role play. George was not cheating, it was his own wife. Sheldon misunderstood what he saw at 9 years old and carried that misunderstanding for decades without ever asking a single question. He never asked. George, who was that woman? He never asked. Mom, was Dad cheating on you? He never asked. His eidetic memory captured the image. His brain assigned an interpretation, and his mouth repeated that interpretation to strangers in California for 20 years while the man in the image was in a grave in Texas unable to defend himself. George Cooper was not a drunk. He was a man who drank on a patio because nobody asked how he was doing. George Cooper was not a cheater. He was a husband whose wife dressed up to save their marriage and whose son walked in at the wrong moment. George Cooper was not crude or simple or not that bright. He was a man who held a family together for 20 years while the family looked right through him. And his own son, the genius, the one with the perfect memory, is the person who did the most damage to his reputation. not through malice, through the catastrophic combination of a brain that cannot process emotions and a mouth that never stops talking. And then the Nobel Prize, the culmination of everything. Sheldon Cooper on a stage in Stockholm accepting the highest honor in physics. The audience applauds. His wife cries. His friends cheer. The world sees a genius. And in his speech, Sheldon thanks people. He thanks his wife Amy. He thanks his friends Leonard, Penny, Howard, Raj, and Bernadette. He reads a text from his brother. A text from a tire shop in Texas. Congratulations from the dropout who funded Sheldon's entire trajectory. A text mention. In a speech. That is how Sheldon Cooper thanks the brother who dropped out of school at 16 so the family could afford to send Sheldon to college. The brother who held the family together after George died. The brother who worked 2 jobs on 3 hours of sleep while Sheldon was in California solving equations. A text mention. And the people Sheldon thanks at length. His friends. People he met in his 20s. People who argued with him about comic books and takeaway food and whose turn it was to drive. He thanks them with stories and tears and genuine emotion. The friends get the speech. The brother gets a text. The sister gets nothing. The dead father gets a legacy of being called a drunk. That is the math of Sheldon Cooper. The people who gave the most receive the least. The people who gave the least receive the most. And the person who gave everything, George Cooper, receives the worst gift of all, a son who remembers him wrong. And here is what makes this truly unforgivable. The show agrees with Sheldon. Young Sheldon ends with Sheldon arriving at Caltech and the narrator saying, "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." The audience feels triumphant. The genius made it. The journey was worth it. But where is everyone else at the end of that journey? George is dead. Mary is drowning in grief and religion. Missy is a 14-year-old in a broken household who will take 6 years to finish high school and end up hostessing at Fuddruckers. Georgie is a 17-year-old dropout who just became the sole provider for a family of 3. Sheldon is exactly where he is supposed to be. Everyone else is exactly where he left them. The show frames this as a triumph. I am calling it what it is. Sheldon Cooper consumed his family's resources for 14 years. He absorbed their money, their attention, their time, their emotional bandwidth. He left when the bill came due, and he won a Nobel Prize using a brain that was built on the backs of people he cannot even describe accurately. Sheldon Cooper is not evil. I want to be clear about that. He is not a villain in the way that word is normally used. He does not wake up in the morning and choose to hurt people. He does not scheme. He does not manipulate with awareness. He does not enjoy causing pain. But he is dangerous. He is dangerous the way a black hole is dangerous. Not through intention. Through gravity. Everything near him gets pulled in. Everything near him gets consumed. And the black hole does not notice because noticing is not something black holes do. Sheldon Cooper is a human black hole. He pulls in attention, resources, love, sacrifice, patience, money, and time from every person in his orbit. And he does not notice the damage because his brain is not wired to detect it. Alexithymia prevents him from feeling his own emotions. And whatever prevents him from seeing other people's emotions ensures that the destruction happens in total silence. George Cooper drove his 9-year-old son to NASA because the boy had calculations he wanted an engineer to see. George sat in the car while Sheldon went inside. He waited. He did not understand the math. He did not understand the physics. He did not understand why his son's brain worked the way it did. But he drove him there because that is what fathers do. They drive their children toward things they cannot understand and wait in the car while the future happens inside. George died and Sheldon packed for Caltech. George was buried and Sheldon flew to California. George's name was spoken at family dinners and Sheldon replaced it with 3 adjectives. Beer drinking, not that bright, crude. A man who drove his son to NASA and waited in the car was remembered as crude. A man who turned down his dream job so his family could stay in Medford was remembered as not that bright. A man who sat on a patio drinking beer because nobody in his house ever asked how he was doing was remembered as a drunk. Sheldon Cooper has an IQ of 187. He has an eidetic memory. He can recall every equation he has ever seen. He can remember the atomic weight of every element on the periodic table. He won the Nobel Prize for solving a problem that the greatest minds on Earth could not solve. And he cannot remember his own father correctly. That is not a genius. That is a tragedy wearing a bow tie. If this hit you the way it hit me, you know